Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. President Freiberger, Dr. Serageldin. Dr. Serageldin forgets to mention that he's my mentor. I've learned an immense amount from him, and it's always a pleasure to see you again. You left a mark on everything you touched in the bank, and whichever human being you've touched bears the marks of kindness. Thank you for that introduction. Nizami Gنجوی was among the 10 top founders of genres of discourse in the Dari Persian language, whose influence is cascaded through the last 8 centuries. As he wrote, Nizami's calling is crafting of Dari poetry. Suitable for him is rhyming Dari into poetry. This was the lingua franca of the region. And among others, he influenced Italian opera in the 18th century, so his impact is wide. Let me pay tribute to the Nizami Gنجوی Center, which has turned Baku under the co-chairs into a central node of dialogue and international exchange among civilizations. I think Ismail, as usual, has had a knack for choosing the right date. When he chose the 15th, I didn't know I will be speaking to a drama that would fit Nizami Gنجوی's description of his very rich dramas. President Biden's decision on withdrawal of US forces and the decision of NATO to do the same sets a change in context for a reset of assumptions, alignments, and actions. I've had constructive conversation with President Biden and Secretary General of NATO Stoltenberg last night in a very productive hour-and-a-half meeting today with Secretary Blinken, who visited us in Kabul. I respect President Biden's decision and have spent the last 24 hours to help frame the next chapter of our relationship with the United States, NATO, non-NATO allies, including Azerbaijan, that has had close to 1,000 troops in Afghanistan, and also our developmental partners. The fundamental issue for us is when context changes, we change accordingly. So I'm not going to discuss the past. I'm going to focus on the present and future. If you had questions on the past, we could return to those. What are some of the implications of the decision that President Biden has made? It's a game-changing decision, as it forces all actors and stakeholders in the region, in Eurasia, in the Islamic world, and globally to rethink their assumptions. The first consequence is that it removes the major element of turbulence and uncertainty that has prevailed in the last 2 years. Will the US withdraw or will it stay? The amount of time that this decision took was truly a source of turbulence because everybody was operating with a different set of assumptions, and that was not productive. Now that ambiguity is removed, we have clarity. 2, it puts an end to the narrative of US-NATO as part of a larger regional competition, and Afghanistan as a site of that competition with other big powers. Also, I hope that it puts an end to conspiracy theories, because there's been no shortage of those as to why the United States is here, what's the scale, what's the presence, what's the future. There is positively the possibility of a new narrative. For us, it's a narrative of responsibility, sacrifice, partnership, in nation building, peace building, market building, in regional connectivity, in security. The region will have to now rethink fundamentally its parameters of security and its partnership with Afghanistan. On the other side, there is the possibility, as President Freiberger mentioned in her introduction, of narratives of jihadists, conquest, and in the triumph of transnational terrorist networks and transnational criminal networks. We are going to be competing on two narratives, and I hope that one set that we advocate with. The other implication is that the UN is going to be given a renewed importance in its functions of peacemaking and regional consensus building. It has been understood that the UN is precisely made for this function because there's been no substitute to be able to bring all the key stakeholders and hopefully serve as a catalyst for consensus. The risks of containing transnational terrorist networks for 20 years were borne first exclusively by the United States and NATO, and then particularly in the last 6 years by the government of Afghanistan and our international allies. Over 94% of the operations conducted in the last 2 years against these forces has been done by the Afghan government. The role of international forces after I became president at the end of 2014 has been reduced. So the footprint, and as you recall, I hope their casualties last year were 0. The Eurasian region, the most dynamic region of the world, economically, in the center of the likely center of economic gravity for the 21st century, will have to re-examine its dimensions of security. As to how, the fundamental question to them is what are the advantages of a stable, democratic, sovereign, neutral, and connected Afghanistan, the end state that we have advocated and the international partners have endured, or, God forbid, in Afghanistan in chaos and a center of threats to others. The most significant part of the decision of President Biden is that the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and the Afghan people have to confront and overcome the legacies left by the last 20 years of violence and the last 42 years. We have been a scene of conflict, first generated by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and then, of course, by the attack on the towers on 9/11. It's 42 years, and this legacy now needs to be confronted and overcome by us with association with our regional and global partners. We see the potential for a new chapter in our partnership. Secretary Blinken today has confirmed that the Strategic Partnership Agreement, the Bilateral Security Agreement, and the Status of Forces Agreement remain intact. Support for our heroic defense and security forces, as well as economic assistance and humanitarian assistance, will continue. We are going to reconfigure the mechanisms. It's a moment of choice for Taliban. Will they opt for a peace that is on the table, or will they opt for conquest? I see my old friend and partner Shaukat Aziz, and thank you, Shaukat, for being here. It's also, Mr. Prime Minister, a moment of choice for our neighbor, Pakistan. Its For Pakistan, it's a decision of destiny. Will it opt for regional cooperation, international partnership, in regional prosperity through joint efforts, or will it give way to the forces that have hitherto supported and sustained the Taliban in the wave of extremism for which Pakistan, next to Afghanistan, has probably paid the highest price? So it is a moment of decision. We will need to watch. Turning back to the second part, security. The first issue that I'd like to bring to your attention is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is focused on individual rights. Fortunately, they are all embodied in our Constitution, but Afghanistan has been denied for 42 years a collective right, which is the right to peace. The Charter of the United Nations holds this promise, but the Universal Declaration of Rights is not linked the two. In our view, the right to peace is the foundational right that ensures then the delivery of individual rights, particularly of women, youth, the disadvantaged sectors, the majorities, the poor. 90% of our people live below $2 a day. That is the right, that the social rights, sets of rights in the Universal Declaration, that needs to. Fortunately, in the last 6 years, 58% of the administration now is below 40 years of age, including most of our security sector, below the rank of brigadier general. And 30% of the administration is now women. Afghan women speak for themselves and articulate for themselves, and I'm extraordinarily proud of this. Hence, peacemaking, peace building, and sustaining peace. I've captured our vision of peace in a diagram, which is a bridge. Our current condition is one of restricted warfare. The bridge is 3 parts. The destination is a just and lasting peace. The parts are to make peace through a political settlement, to build peace through a government of peace under the current constitution for a short duration, culminating in an election. The first phase will need to end in a public assembly. We have a remarkable institution called the Loy Jirga, or the Grand Assembly, where all walks of life gather together. After the election, there will need to be a political compact. We have articulated this vision fully. It's socialized, and I've made very clear, if I have 4 years of my term left, but for the sake of peace, my colleagues and I are willing to hold elections from 6 months to a year maximum, so that the will of the people, the key to us is the right of the people to choose their leader, and for me to hand over legitimate authority to my successor. Let me turn to the classic notion of security, because that is uppermost probably on your minds. We are not at risk of collapse. The narratives of the Afghan government falling apart is a false narrative. Our commandos, special forces and air force alone are 40,000 strong. They've trained among the best. They are among the best in the region. As long as this force stays, there is no risk of state collapse. I've spent a lot of time with them, and I'm proud as the function of Commander-in-Chief. Most of the operations have been carried by them. Now, they've all been brought into one command called the ANASOC, or the Afghanistan National Authority for Special Operations. Every day, they carry 30 to 40 operations with precision and with determination. The force is led by a new generation of men and some women. Women are beginning to make a major mark in the police and slowly in the army, including we have pilots and other parts where the women are participating. The key issue is not the cohesion or the loyalty of the force. There's not been a single occasion where they've disobeyed their civilian leaders. And one of the distinguished characteristics of Afghan history is that since 1747, our last incarnation as a continuous state, only 2 generals have led this country. And even during the communist period, the party took over authority from the officers. President, vice presidents, national security advisor, minister of defense, minister of interior, director of national security are all civilians. And this is a key. We have a layered security of 350,000 forces from corps commands in different parts of the country. In addition to this, people are armed and ready to defend their villages and their districts. The challenge is twofold. One, manageable, enablers in technology, because it's access to the right form of technology. Fortunately, this year, our key civilian effort is digitalization of the economy, the society, and the government. And we have now the human capital. We're about 400 people with masters and PhDs, 120 of them alone from the Berlin Technical University. The other challenge is the nature of the war. Distinguished colleagues, war has become totally unrestricted. There are no rules to this war. Never since the Mongol invasion have our women been so exposed, our civil society leaders targeted, our ulama assassinated, etc. So it's that. It's not the level of face-to-face confrontation. The Taliban, including in Kandahar, they attempted conquest of one district, lost one, left behind 1,000 dead, but mined the place to hell. Today I was talking to the thing. They've mined every single place, every single canal, etc. It's a horror story. It's this unrestricted war that needs to end. The other component is a multi-dimensional view of security. What do I mean by that? First, the citizen perspective. From the view of the Afghan citizen, the range of what they expect from state vis-a-vis security is not restricted to physical security. COVID-19 was one example, and we managed it, thank God, very well, 2 waves, and I hope that we won't have the 3rd wave. We have the lowest casualties and have been dealing. For the first time, we distributed food packages to 90% of the population to support them. But it also includes to access to education and others. Human security now has a wide definition from the perspective of the citizen. The second category in the multidimensionality is the society's needs for security. Being relatively good is not enough for them. So the right to movement is fundamental. And the right to movement is challenged because of the attacks on taxis, on buses, on tankers, and others. There's a systematic series of attacks by the Taliban that cannot be preempted because they're random. But society, and then within the society, each category, and we have at least 28 social categories in our country, has specific articulation of needs. Here, the major issue for the region, and particularly for Europe, is exit. Afghan society is networked. We have a diaspora over 1 million people. 1 million people in Afghanistan can easily pack and move. They have voice, the voice if it's not responded in the classic Hirschman. So the possibility of immigration from this poses a regional dimension of security. The other dimension of security is the needs of the market. Market is an ecosystem. The market cannot be summed up into the private sector. I've articulated this in a 10-dimensional frame to see the key components of the market. In the needs of the market, our society completely depends on supply chains and value chains managed by the private sector. The state is an asset, but they provide food security. Every district in Afghanistan, nearly 400 districts, is supplied by the market. And COVID again showed how effective this was and level of. The third thing is security from the perspective of networks. We have virtuous networks, civil society networks, the networks of ulama, the networks of women. Afghanistan is forming social capital as there is no tomorrow. There's just been a flourishing of social network. And these networks are regional. Every day, 100,000 people probably cross to Pakistan, and 50 or 30,000 people cross to Iran, and there's a flow. We are a hub, a regional hub of flows that has existed for hundreds. The other part is the malign networks, because they are the most sophisticated. The drug network is probably one of the most sophisticated networks in terms of global integration, credit, and others. Related to this is because we are embarking, if Afghanistan is to deliver its potential, it needs mega projects of connectivity. The Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline is one example. The railway from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan to Afghanistan to Pakistan as another. Kasa 1000, the power transmission from Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan will join this to Pakistan is another, and these are just the beginning. Mega projects require a different focus because just political guarantees are not enough. And then there's the major dimension, relationship between states in terms of assumptions of security. Afghanistan was seen till 6 years ago by Central Asia to be a source of poison. Today it's seen as a source of benefit, and Afghanistan is considered the 6th Central Asian member country. Regional perspective, again, plays to this, and here is the risk. One of the categories of risk that will need to be re-examined fresh is what would be the risk of transnational terrorist networks in transnational criminal networks, particularly to Eurasia, and heroin from Afghanistan has now made it to Canada. It's past Australia and others. It's only the Mexican cartel that's preventing it from getting to the United States. So those networks allow. Let me come back to the advantages so we have time for questions. What are some of our key assets, just in terms of location? Afghanistan is the shortest route between Central Asia, West Asia, and South Asia. Historically, Toynbee, the great British historian, coined the term called the roundabout, in contrast to a cul-de-sac. A roundabout is a place where ideas, people, and goods flow. For 2,500 years, if not 5,000 years, ideas, people, and goods have flown through us. We are also known as the Gate of South Asia or Gate of India, a crossroad, a land bridge. This spatial location turned into isolation only at the end of 19th century, giving rise to a buffer state. Today, for the next 300 years, our location is absolutely critical because the first industrial revolution, railways. The second industrial revolution, electricity and steam engine. The third, computers, and the fourth, digitalization, all. Two, we are the upper riparian for most of our neighbors. We provide the water. And now we are harnessing our water. In the next 3 years, Afghanistan has the potential of putting 1.3 million hectares of new land under cultivation and increasing this. It could again become a broadband. 3, it's a remarkable source of renewable energy. Solar in gigawatts, not in megawatts. Wind, 70,000 megawatts potential. Hydro, minimally 25,000. Geothermal, about 8 to 10,000. And as I said, solar is increasing by the day. The other is just our lithium is estimated to be $1 trillion. The Russians called us the Mendeleev table. For the rare earth, 12 out of the 14 elements of rare earth exist in Afghanistan. And it's some of the richest unexplored iron mines, copper mines, and others in the world. We're fortunate that we have signed a memorandum of understanding with Fortescue, one of the leading producers of energy in green industry. We are in the process of finalizing the studies. If the studies pan out, there will be 20,000 megawatts of power from hydro, resulting in some of the greenest industry on earth. It could give us a type of jump that Singapore acquired from its banking location and others. Let me conclude. Afghanistan can be a stable Afghanistan, could be source of immense benefit, particularly to Pakistan, where the rate of growth could be enhanced by as much as 2%, to Central Asia, to Iran, and others. Here, President Biden's decision is a moment that allows for thinking through. The good news is that almost all regional countries now believe that the future lies in regional cooperation and the cooperative advantage. The other side is the risk of intense war, which could have unforetold consequences. Our focus on reaching a political agreement and on making use of this moment is to avoid those scenarios. But God forbid, should those come, we are ready to fight to death, because it would not be a question of choice, but a question of commitment, and for me, the embodiment of constitutional duty. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. All of you are very significant voices in this partnership to focus on the opportunities and to generate the consensus that is needed to move forward. 20 years of internationally based conflict in Afghanistan is going to be over. Today, we've charted our way for the next 6 months. It's going to be an orderly, predictable process. Let me pay tribute to all the men and women in uniform from your countries and from all over the world who came in our hour of need, also the civilians who've helped us. Now it's time to put those energies all to construction. Thank you.